This is a wedding dress hostage situation. So this would be In-Laws from Hell or whatever that episode was called from a few from a few weeks ago. Oh. If you hear, did anybody yawn? This is a conspiracy. I'm telling you, there's something going on here. I don't know what, but there's something going on here. Something. Okay. This is not what I want. Okay. Email. Back to email time. So, Danny, I heard the show the other night, but unfortunately I wasn't able to call in, probably for the better, since it might have taken too long to tell the story. I'm going to include an extra few anecdotes, but the funnest story is this first one. So several years ago, I was fresh out of college and engaged. The engagement happened pretty quick. We ended up getting married a little under a year after we started dating. And I only met her parents one time before we were engaged because they lived so far away. She had hardly ever mentioned them and had moved out of her home when she was 17 because of how crazy her mom was. But she was still in contact with her dad at this point. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Lindsay, we could do it. We'll do a conspiracy theory episode and we'll talk about Peter Schickele because we haven't done one in a while. And honestly, this shit's driving me crazy. To start off, I'm definitely a low-value male, a mattress on the floor and everything, but part of that comes because I'm extremely thrifty and I'm a minimalist. I can understand. When we got engaged, we wanted to have a small ceremony without a party, reception, etc., and just do it on the cheap. Except my fiance did want a nice wedding dress, but then her mom got involved and wanted to turn this into a whole thing and made a big deal about having a party until we relented because she said that she'd pay for everything, which I was all about. A few months before the wedding, her parents start freaking out about sending invitations out. No joke, we were planning on inviting maybe 30 to 40 people total originally, and after her parents got involved, it turned into over 200. They said they weren't going to pay for the invitations unless we did the ones they wanted, which we wouldn't agree to because they looked so tacky. So we went to a local stationery shop and found the cheapest, decent-looking ones we could. Something similar to that scene from Seinfeld with George buying his wedding invitations. This turned into a whole thing, and after they saw the ones we picked and paid for, her dad called her and started screaming at her about how terrible they were and how embarrassed they were that so many of their friends were going to be seeing these and whatever until my wife is straight up crying, and she hands me the phone, and I just lay into him about how shitty he's being, and he hangs up on me. He calls her back 2 minutes later and tells her he doesn't want to hear me talk to him again, and then hangs up again. And to use the name Kabul, it was the Kabbalah. But we got so much to get to. The Goob, we'll have you call in about some conspiracies. We got to hear them. So the next day, her mom calls her and says that she's driving up to where we are, like an 8-hour drive, and she's going to have the dress store mess up her dress so that will ruin her wedding. My wife can't tell if her mom was just being a bitch or if she was serious, so she leaves work early and drives to the dress shop and picks it up before her mom can get there. That night, her dad calls her asking where the dress is, and after my wife told him that she had it, he said that she had to meet him at a Costco parking lot with the dress and to come alone or he would call the police and charge her with stealing it. What the fuck? I couldn't talk her out of not going, and she ended up giving it back to him and was verbally and emotionally assaulted for over 2 hours before she came back home. I'm still pissed about it to this day, but it gets funnier and funnier thinking about how ridiculous it was at the time. Luckily, they didn't do anything to the dress, and the wedding ended up being mostly okay, despite having to delay the wedding by 2 hours because her parents showed up late and tried to claim that we told them the wrong time. Yikes. Anecdote number 1. Something I didn't mention earlier was that my wife and both of her brothers are adopted because her dad was sterile, something her mom never let him forget. A few years after we were married, her older brother ended up finding his birth mother and started having a relationship with her. This was inspiring to my wife and then started searching for her biological parents. My brother-in-law then told my in-laws that he found his bio mom and half-sister and talked about how happy he was to fill this missing hole of knowing where he came from. This ended up being a huge break in the family, and since we were supporting him, her parents cut off all contact with my wife and her brother completely. We went 5 years with no contact from them, and it was glorious. Previously, it was stressful visiting them and even communicating over the phone because you had to walk on eggshells. It wasn't until my father-in-law died of a heart attack out of the blue that they started talking again. Yikes. About a year after my father-in-law died, my mother-in-law decided to get back into the dating game and started signing up for dating sites. This is number 2. Something I wasn't familiar with before this was how prevalent the scams are for older women. My mother-in-law would be legit texting and calling 10 of these guys all day, and they would all be scammers. But she would legit listen to reason because they would just shower her in compliments. Or she wouldn't listen to reason and because they would shower her in compliments and she loved the attention. All the scams were pretty clever. They would be dating her for months and always have an excuse as to why they couldn't fly to see her, but she couldn't see through it. Once I even sat down and had her give me all of the phone numbers, and one by one I would show her they were all voice over IP numbers and not really a cell phone. Then I would point out how all of the selfies that they were fake and sometimes even just a straight up stock image. She still didn't believe me. It was made worse because even after all of this, the only thing she ever talked about was her boyfriends and how each of them is doing. She had a full-on scrotation of scammers. One of the guys claimed to own a used car dealership in California, used the real name and everything. One time, when she was calling, when she was visiting, I called the dealer and asked to speak with the guy, and he answered. No surprise, he didn't sound Indian and had no idea what I was talking about when I explained everything to him. And this still wasn't enough to convince her. Holy shit, this is mental. So I went nuclear and wrote a bot that would spam call and text every 10 seconds to a list of numbers that I feed it. She was visiting, damn, this is awesome. She was visiting my brother-in-law at the time, and he went through all of her conversations when she was in the other room and gave me all of their numbers. I spent about $60 on Twilio just blowing up the numbers of the scammers with text and voice calls. I would choose a random threat from a big list I had provided. This dude's awesome. Are you kidding? All but one of the scammers immediately stopped contacting her. The one persistent one changed his number and claimed his assistant dropped and broke his phone. She kept talking to him all day, so my brother-in-law couldn't get the new number from her. So he went into her car and turned it on so it'd connect to Bluetooth, and he was able to see what number he was using that way. So I nuked that number and then got a new number and convinced her to switch to Skype because he was moving somewhere that had bad service. This is amazing. It took like probably 6 months of this before one of the scammers actually came and visited her for a weekend. I think after I was able to show her he was a scammer, scared her straight enough that only dates IRL now, but she's still rotating like 3 guys and they all want to marry her. The funny thing is she doesn't like any of them, just the attention. One of these poor bastards got transferred so that he could live closer to her, and he proposed and everything, and she doesn't want to get married. Almost wish she'd go back to the scammers at this point so she isn't stringing anyone else along. Jesus Christ. Number 3. This is the last one and the shorter. Anecdote number 3. This one will be shorter. My wife's other brother is a drug addict, and at the time this happened was living with my other brother-in-law while he was doing a rehab program. One night, he doesn't come home and isn't responding to calls or texts, so we start calling hospitals and jails in the area. As it turns out, he had gotten arrested in one of those to catch a predator stings that the local police did. He ended up getting off pretty easily, just probation, but then he violated his probation and had to do 3 years in state prison. That ended up being way longer than I was thinking, but hopefully it was at least entertaining. Holy shit, William. That was amazing.